This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. The headlines. The United Nations warns of a second Aleppo. Activists say more than 200 are dead as Syrian government forces attack the last rebel stronghold near Damascus.
There is no way to get out, no way to hide from the very massive shelling.
As Florida shooting survivors push for changes to gun laws, Donald Trump says he's willing to ban devices which turn rifles into rapid-fire weapons.
I'm Sharon Juleo in London. Also on the programme, Thailand's so-called baby factory case. A court names a wealthy Japanese man the legal parent of 13 children. And the new treatment bringing hope to children with a rare disorder that causes facial disfigurement.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Glad you could join us. It's 8 in the morning here in Singapore, midnight in London, and 2 a.m. in Syria, which has experienced one of the bloodiest 24 hours of the country's 7-year war. Monitoring agencies say more than 100 people were killed in attacks by Syrian government forces in rebel-held eastern Ghouta on Tuesday. It is an area near the capital of Damascus. Activists say that in 2 days of airstrikes and artillery fire, about 250 people, including children, have been killed there. The UN has compared the onslaught to the siege of Aleppo, and this report by our Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen contains some distressing images.
This could be the beginning of the end of a rebellion in eastern Ghouta that began in 2012. All the other smaller, rebel-held enclaves around Damascus have been starved and bombed into submission. Now it looks to be eastern Ghouta's turn as the regime pushes for decisive victory around the capital. Activists in eastern Ghouta say this is as bad as it's been.
We can hear the shout and the crying of women and children through the windows of their homes, and the missiles and mortars dropping on us like rain. There is nowhere to hide from this nightmare in eastern Ghouta.
A generation has been born into the war. Dozens have been killed by it in the last few hours in eastern Ghouta. Over the years of siege, they've set up a network of underground hospitals. This girl, named in Arabic Angel, escaped the worst, but will have to go back to the streets to get home. And this is her area. With a regime plane dropping what is to be a barrel bomb, unguided, an indiscriminate killer. The Syrian regime denies attacking civilians. It says it's trying to liberate eastern Ghouta from terrorists. Eastern Ghouta is a sprawling mix of concrete suburbs and farmland, starting about 9 miles east of Damascus city centre. The Syrian rebels who've controlled it since 2012 include several Islamist militias, including one with its roots in Al-Qaeda. Eastern Ghouta is surrounded by Syrian government forces. Before the war, it was just a short drive from the Syrian presidential palace. Officially, it's been designated a de-escalation zone. That is an empty phrase. Force decides what happens in Syria. After 7 years, Syria's war isn't ending, but it's changing. President Assad, with the help of Russia and Iran, is now secure. But Syria is linked into a web of war and power politics, which guarantees more bloodshed. How many times in the last 7 years have Syrians dug through the rubble for survivors? There's talk of safe corridors out for civilians, but based on past form, the regime wants victory in eastern Ghouta and the surrender of the rebels. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.
And staying with Syria, pro-government forces have entered the country's northwestern Afrin region to help Kurdish militia battle a Turkish assault. Now, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan described the convoy as being made up of terrorists acting independently.
Today, a pro-regime terror group came to support terrorists and attempted to enter Syria's Afrin, but they were pushed back after artillery fire. We have agreed with Russia and Iran regarding the Afrin issue. These kinds of terror organisations take wrong steps with the decisions they take. It is not possible for us to allow this. They will pay a heavy price for these mistakes.
And also making the news today, President Donald Trump has expressed his willingness to ban the mechanisms which allow a rifle to shoot almost automatic bursts. Now, the devices known as bump stocks were used by the gunman who shot dead 58 people in Las Vegas in October. This was his announcement.
And just a few moments ago, I signed a memorandum directing the Attorney General to propose regulations to ban all devices that turn legal weapons into machine guns. I expect that these critical regulations will be finalized, Jeff, very soon.
A lawyer and the son-in-law of one of Russia's richest men has pleaded guilty to a charge of lying to federal investigators as part of U.S. Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe into alleged interference in the 2016 presidential election. Alex van der Zwaan was charged earlier at a federal court hearing in Washington. He will be sentenced in April. Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, has called for international peace talks on the Middle East to take place by the middle of this year. He says Palestinians are living in an unbearable situation and that a conference must lead to the acceptance of Palestine as a full UN member state. And now an update on the problems at the KFC fast food chain. Now, the company says a disruption in the UK is expected to continue for the rest of the week after a change of delivery supplier meant that they ran out of their vital ingredient, chicken. And just under half of the 900 British outlets are closed. And let's take a look at these pictures now, because they're proving really popular online. Of course, it shows Queen Elizabeth. Of course, no surprise there. She's attended her very first show at London Fashion Week. Now, the Queen sat in the front row of the show by up-and-coming designer Richard Quinn, next to the woman often referred to as fashion royalty. Of course, you will recognise her as Vogue magazine's Anna Wintour. The Queen then awarded the inaugural Queen Elizabeth II Award for British Design to Mr. Quinn.
Scientists have discovered the cause of a rare blood vessel disorder that can cause serious facial disfigurement and life-threatening bleeding in children. The research pinpoints the genes responsible for the condition and for the first time identifies existing cancer drugs as a possible treatment. Our medical correspondent Fergus Walsh has a story.
Okay, so we need to do the eggs and froth the eggs.
13-year-old Nikki Christou never knows when her face will start to bleed. She has a rare disorder which means high-pressure blood in her arteries feeds directly into her veins. It causes swelling, facial disfigurement and life-threatening bleeds from her nose and even her tear ducts.
It's very scary because you don't really know if it's going to stop, how much blood you're losing, and if it is really bad, then I can, become very lightheaded and things like that. And so I think when these bleeds happen, you just know that it's time for an ambulance.
Nikki has not let her condition, known as AVM, hold her back.
The winner of Junior Bake Off is Nikki.
As well as winning Junior Bake Off in 2016, she's also interviewed the Prime Minister for CBBC.
So, what were you like as a teenager?
Oh gosh.
Hi, Nikki.
Nikki has had hundreds of appointments at Great Ormond Street Hospital and 30 operations.
How are you doing? It's lovely to see you. You too.
I'm just going to have a little feel of your face.
And is now part of groundbreaking research, which is led by her consultant. The team at UCL's Institute of Child Health sequenced the DNA of more than 150 children with her condition and found it could be triggered by 4 faulty genes.
This is really an enormous step for us. Having discovered the genetic causes of these in individual patients, we're now able to suggest treatments which could potentially slow the growth, stop the growth, or perhaps even reverse the growth of this condition in the longer term.
And those drug treatments come from an unlikely source. The gene mutations discovered in this lab, which are responsible for these faulty blood vessels, also play a key role in the growth of some cancers. Now, the good news is there are several cancer drugs which inhibit these faulty genes, which can now be repurposed to treat Nikki's condition.
This is your right eye, and this is the AVM.
Nikki is one of 2 patients who are taking the targeted cancer drugs. Today she's finding out the results of some new scans.
This looks good, it looks exciting, that after 6 months it seems to be holding the growth.
It's really good, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you.
Yeah.
It'll be at least a year before doctors know for sure whether the cancer drugs Nikki is taking are working. But the discovery of the faulty genes has given hope to patients with this debilitating condition. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Now, for some people, surrogacy is the only way to become a parent. For some surrogate mothers, it's their livelihood, and in many cases, it's a transnational issue. Now, a Thai court has awarded a Japanese man full paternity rights for the 13 babies that he fathered through commercial surrogacy. Now, his lawyer said he simply wanted a large family. The so-called baby factory scandal, though, led the Thai government banning commercial surrogacy for foreigners. But what about laws elsewhere in Asia? A little earlier, I posed that question to Marcus Durrell, a family law partner at Haley Ho and BLP Private Wealth in Hong Kong.
They are stringent or, in other cases, completely non-existent. The laws in Hong Kong, for example, are very stringent indeed, very draconian. And in fact, in many parts of Asia, surrogacy law has been driven underground. Commercial surrogacy is not allowed in Hong Kong, and as a result, it has been driven underground, and it makes it very difficult for the courts to get involved at all in surrogacy, and it's very, very important that courts do get involved to help regulate, to ensure that the children's interests are kept as a priority.
Right. Now, we're using the term commercial surrogacy, but can you explain that for our viewers?
Well, commercial surrogacy is where money is paid to a surrogate mother for the purposes of carrying a child for intended parents. And there's a huge amount of confusion about what that actually means. In some situations, say in England and Hong Kong, it's possible and legal to pay expenses to a surrogate mother, and perfectly fine. And the courts in England, for example, can authorise those payments. It gets very confusing in Hong Kong, for example, where it's actually illegal to make any payment at all to, say, an agency for the purposes of finding a surrogate mother. That causes major difficulties for people, because they don't actually realise that they are committing a criminal offence for making these payments.
Right.
Surrogacy law is fraught with numerous pitfalls.
Right, as you say, numerous pitfalls. So how to get it right? Are there countries in Asia that are doing the right thing?
Well, I mean, I think the jurisdiction with the most advanced law in this area really is in Australia. I would say that is an area where the judges are very up to speed on surrogacy law, and particularly in dealing with international cases, because that's what you need to have experience in, international cases.
And at this moment, a family law expert based in Hong Kong, speaking earlier to Sharon. You're watching Newsday on the BBC, live from Singapore and London. Still to come on the program, we'll be taking a look at the Winter Olympic athletes competing under foreign flags.
And also on the program, how virtual reality is being used to warn people about the very real dangers of bushfires in Australia.
Welcome back, everyone. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore.
Thanks for staying with us. I'm Sharanjit Lail in London. Our top stories. More than 200 people are now known to have been killed in the past 2 days as the Syrian government continues to bombard the rebel enclave of Eastern Ghouta.
President Donald Trump has expressed his willingness to ban bump stocks, the mechanisms which allow a rifle to shoot in almost automatic bursts. Let's now take a look at some of the front pages from around the world, and we start off with the international edition of the Japan Times, and it leads with a story of a U.S. fighter jet which caught fire and had to dump its fuel tanks into a lake in northern Japan. The Japanese defense minister said no one was hurt, but the huge tanks landed just 400 meters from a fishing boat. Singapore's Straits Times publication focuses on planned historic tax rises, and it quotes the city-state's finance minister, Heng Swee Kit, who says it was a difficult decision, but one that was needed to help Singapore raise its revenues. And finally, you have the China Daily, and it says Chinese authorities will send a cultural relics expert to the U.S. to fix a terracotta warrior that had its thumb stolen while on display at a Philadelphia museum. The expert, who specializes in restoring relics, which are more than 2,000 years old, says it will take 3 to 5 months to fix the wounded terracotta warrior. And those are the papers. Moving on now to the Winter Games. And if you're like me, you've been tuning in to all the actions in Pyeongchang. Well, did you know that out of around the 3,000 athletes, 178 are competing for a country they weren't born in? Well, host nation South Korea is using the most non-native athletes. It naturalized 18 in the run-up to 2018, most of them in the men's ice hockey team who were originally from the U.S. and Canada. And it's actually the U.S. and Canada that have lost most athletes to other countries at these Winter Olympics. 37 American-born athletes are competing under different flags. So which sports feature the most non-native athletes? Well, ice hockey is indeed there, as is figure skating, but it's alpine skiing that tops the list. Earlier I spoke to Michael Hein, head of the International Center for Olympic Studies, and I asked him if these athletes make the switch because there isn't space for them in their own country's teams.
Well, it stands to reason that quite a few of them switch countries for just that reason, that they do not anticipate to be able to qualify for the Olympics, and therefore take a longer-term view of trying to make it in another country, because we shouldn't forget that the Olympics, of course, are the biggest stage for the presentation of sports and for the presentation of athletes. So it has a huge motivational impact for any athlete to try and make it to the biggest stage in world sports.
So, Michael, by joining another country, what is their mindset? Are they competing for themselves, or are they competing for the country?
I think it's all two, or maybe we should say all three of the above. All Olympic athletes, I think, are always competing for themselves. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to sustain the Olympic and athletic labor that they have to produce over years and years and years to stay at the top of their game. They probably also, of course, participate for their new countries, for strategic reasons, but also maybe for emotionally felt and cultural reasons. So we cannot really separate these things out.
But Michael, on the flip side, it also gives some countries such as Nigeria, Eritrea, and Kosovo the opportunity to have their first appearance in the Winter Games.
Well, exactly, and that is one of the beauties of the Olympics. This enabling of friendly competition across borders, or at least through fairly relaxed borders and national barriers in this sense. On the other hand, we also, of course, have to keep in mind that the Nigerian women's bobsleigh team that you mentioned actually consists of athletes who all were born in the United States. So they are of Nigerian origin in a way, but not personally born in the country. In a way, you wonder what the cultural connection might be.
But by naturalizing these athletes from other countries, is it fair, or could it be cheating?
Could it be cheating? I think it depends when you ask the fans on whether the athlete you are losing actually walks out with the medal, as it were, and wins it for another country. That has happened in South Korea, since we're on the topic, with a very well-known speed skater who won a number of Olympic gold medals for South Korea, had a falling out with his sports federation, then signed up for Russia and went on to win another couple. So is it cheating? Personally, I don't think so. Most of the athletes probably don't make it to the top rank, as we mentioned, and it gives the athletes at least a chance to perform on the world stage, you know. So I would see this as positively, and in this age of globalization, national boundaries seem to be more permeable anyways.
That was Olympic expert Michael Hayne, and although I wouldn't like to suggest all non-native Olympic athletes are like this, some just want to be there. Meet Elizabeth Swaney from the United States, representing Hungary through her grandparents. She made it to the Winter Olympics with a spectacularly mediocre performance, slipping through a loophole in international qualifying. When she took to the half-pipe competition in freestyle skiing in Pyeongchang on Monday, she got through the same way she'd done in competitions before. She managed to not fall off her skis, meandering from one side of the pipe to the other with no tricks en route and displaying skills many amateurs could lay down without much training. She came a glorious last, but did at least achieve her dream of becoming an Olympian. With what was easily the most original performance of the Games so far, she made it by relentlessly showing up at international competition, so accumulating enough points to qualify. So, Sharon, this might just be my ticket to the Winter Games.
That's right, Rico. I would love to see
I might just do some figure skating or some downhill skiing.
I'd love to see you on figure skates, Rico, and I'm sure many of our viewers would too. But going from the wintry cold of the Winter Olympics, let's move on to another topic on bushfires, in fact, because virtual reality is being used to warn people in Australia about the dangers of them. A simulation showing what happens if you don't leave your property is being trialled in the state of Victoria, which suffered the country's worst ever fires in 2009. Our correspondent Howell Griffith went to see the impact the VR is having.
As the embers land and the panic sets in, this is what it feels like to be in a bushfire. It may be virtual, but this video shows the real consequences of not leaving early and making the wrong choice.
That was scary. So bad. It was
pretty scary.
Yeah.
Does it make you think you were actually facing a fire?
Yeah. I could like feel it and everything.
The video's being toured around the state of Victoria, which 9 years ago experienced Australia's worst ever bushfires, killing 173 people. Reliving the experience can be pretty confronting.
Unbelievable how realistic it actually seemed. Yeah, it was pretty crazy, and yeah, it brought back a lot of memories too. Yeah, just especially driving along the road in that last scene there, and the tree falling down and all that sort of thing. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on.
It's actually quite realistic how quick things happen, and actually does give you a bit of sense of what you need to do and how quick things change without you actually realising it.
Last year saw Australia's driest winter on record, which means the risks of bushfire this year are particularly high. Total fire bans are put in place on very hot days, but even then it's hard to persuade everyone that they need to be prepared.
This fire near Melbourne last month showed just how quickly the flames can be carried by the wind. Dozens of homes were evacuated, helicopters brought in to try and stop it. Even for experienced firefighters, the conditions can be challenging.
When you walk outside, you can actually feel the moisture get sucked out of your eyeballs.
Gary Cook has been fighting bushfires for more than 3 decades, but no two are the same. They're always unpredictable.
They can actually change wind direction just by the intensity of the fire, so you get this massive uplift of heat, massive convection columns, cooling of the air up at the top, can generate their own lightning. So, you know, major wildfires, major bushfires, very scary situation.
And that's it for Newsday. We'll be back the next hour. Stay with us.